This is TWiT.
Green bubbles, blue bubbles, RCS, MMS, SMS, all sorts of letters and complicated, weird things. Shouldn't have to be complicated, but apparently it is. And in 2022, I think it's probably pretty safe to say, if it wasn't already, Apple has won the messaging wars, at least as far as, the platform kind of specific messaging, at least in the US anyways. A lot of people outside of the US would be like, what are you talking about? Way more Android devices. Everybody's using WhatsApp, whatever the case may be. But in the US, Apple is really reigning supreme when it comes to messaging. And there's a few things at play right now as far as why we're talking about it right now. There was a Wall Street Journal article that reported on the pressures impacting school-age children, which really goes hand in hand with a lot of what we've been seeing in recent months. A lot of reporting done around kind of the impact of big tech on children, Instagram and body issues in teenagers, that sort of stuff. I think this article kind of falls into that bucket, that category as well. But the article itself concludes that messaging within iMessage, ultimately, it creates an us versus them mentality. That and they spell out some examples. It ostracizes certain Android users, some of its youngest users. iMessage, of course, has a lot of features that SMS doesn't support, right? It has things like read receipts, has typing indicators, has the memojis, the stickers, the GIFs, that sort of stuff. All that kind of stuff that, at least with SMS, is not used very much. And again, here in the US, I hear all the time from people, because we talk about this on All About Android from time to time. People outside of the US are like, yeah, well, why are you still using SMS? No one here uses SMS anymore. Everyone's using WhatsApp or whatever. But I don't know what to tell you. Here in the US, maybe we're just slow to the uptick or whatever, but there are a lot of people still using SMS. It's kind of like it's kind of the no-brainer, like you always know that's going to reach someone here in the US, no matter what messaging platform they happen to be on. Well, iMessage integrates SMS into its experience. So if you happen to have an iPhone and you're chatting with someone else who has an iPhone, iMessage recognizes it. It enables all these extra features. If that doesn't happen, of course, it still passes over through SMS. But what do iMessage and iPhone users see? They see the green bubble versus the blue bubble that they see when they're connected to another iPhone. And the piece really goes into detail as far as stating the increase in desire among young users to use the service, and the fact that when they're not using an iPhone and they're messaging, they feel there was one teen that reported they said, quote, they dread the ostracism that comes with the green text. Another person that was interviewed said people don't seem to like green text bubbles that much and seem to have this visceral negative reaction to it. Right. And I can totally I understand. Right. I didn't have smart. Yes, I am one of those, and B, I was a kid once, and I know what school life is like, and and of course, when I was a kid, we didn't have smartphones, but right. I knew the impact. I knew the kind of the draw of technology then, and I see the incredible draw of technology now, and so I can totally understand how this happens. Do I think Apple's at fault for the fact that kids are ostracizing each other, green versus blue? I mean, I don't know that I can say they are directly at fault, but there are things to consider. And that's what Hiroshi Lockheimer, who is the Google Senior Vice President of Platforms and Ecosystem, said. He went on a tweet storm and basically just kind of pointed out, iMessage can support Android users better. Without making iMessage for Android, right? And we know through the Epic versus Apple courtroom battle, there were docs that were shown off that showed, that said, quote, iMessage on Android would simply serve to remove an obstacle to iPhone families giving their kids Android phones. That was Craig Federighi. Another executive said iMessage amounts to serious lock-in. So there's a business incentive to keep iMessage kind of locked down. But what Hiroshi's point is you can still have these benefits of iMessage that iPhone to iPhone still work and interoperate well and create these, these kind of moments of joy, with emojis and these games that you can play from iMessage to iMessage. But you can also support this growing standard of RCS, rich communication services, which is essentially meant to be an upgrade to SMS. And almost all Android devices support RCS now. It really is SMS, but with some of the features that you get out of something like iMessage. You get the read receipts, you get the typing indicators, better quality media sharing, all this stuff. And I think Hiroshi's point, I totally agree with. It's, you know, have your cake and eat it too, right? Like Apple, you can support iMessage users and have these special features, but not supporting this growing standard that would actually not just make Android users happy. I think it makes everybody happier because then it kind of levels the playing field a little bit and gives everyone a good experience. But I've been rambling. I know you have thoughts, Micah. What do you think?
I do. So I want to start by going with the psychology of the situation here by talking evolutionarily. We spent a lot more times as human beings living in small tribes. And because of that, we are sort of biologically predisposed to tribalism. And as we age, it is the hope that as human beings, we grow, we become more open-minded, we become more empathetic, and we acknowledge that part of our brain that tends toward tribalism, and we try to circumvent it to be more open to realize that, you know, at that time in, you know, many years ago, that tribalism was important for our safety. But in the lives we live today, that is less important. And so we don't have to fall into that trap as much. So all of that's to say that when it comes to kids, I can understand why there may be a little bit more of that tribalism in place. But when it comes to someone who's a little bit older, has a little bit more of an evolved brain, a grown brain, I should say, evolved is the wrong word there, developed brain, at that point, for me, it is not that I want to exclude any Android user or, say, oh, you're an ew, gross green bubble. No, it is precisely what you're talking about. It is that the experience is worse in communicating with them. So I want Apple to fix this. I don't want to have to, whenever a group text is set up and there's a green bubble in the mix, that messes things up. I'm not about that. Like we can't say that so much for kids, because I think that in some cases that can be a little bit of thing, because again, their brains are not as developed as we are. And in some cases they have not been taught to try to circumvent that. So I can't speak, like there may be some kids who are kind of into it for the sake of just being like, oh yes, we're part of an elite club kind of thing. But for adults, it is, and even older young folks, it's just the idea that like it is tough to be able to communicate in the same way that we're used to whenever the person is on Android. And so that dread comes up because it's a worse experience. What do I want? I don't want for that to continue. I want that dread to go away. I want the communication to get better. And I want Apple to adopt RCS if that's what it takes to make that better. I will say that, you know, there are some people who are like, why do the bubbles have to look different? Why does that have to be a thing? I understand why that Apple did not put that feature in place in the beginning specifically for this. Like, oh, let's separate that from this, because I totally agree. It wasn't always SMS and iMessage. Apple had to differentiate between the two, and so that's what it's, you know, that's the way that it does that. So most of the time, what I'm using it for is whenever someone gives me their number, and I know they're an iPhone user, I type that in. If it doesn't pop up correctly, I go, oh, did I get that number right? If it doesn't turn blue. Or if I'm talking to my mom, who has sometimes her phone is out of signal whenever she goes to certain family members. And I know, oh, she's probably out here. There's less signal. And so that's why I'm getting green bubbles right now, because she's not connected to a data network to do the blue bubble texting. So I find value in the green bubble versus blue bubble that exists outside of any kind of tribalism. But I think that the big thing here is that what you said is true. It's not just about making Android users easier to communicate with iPhone. It's also about just making things better for iPhone too. I want that for that reason. And frankly, I hate that there is, right now, a number of kids who are being left out of conversations with friends from school simply because their family may not make as much money and are unable to afford to purchase an iPhone, or their family has always been like an Android family, and so they bought their kid an Android device so that they can be part of that experience, that same experience. Whatever the reason, that othering, let's not give more opportunity for othering. And right now there's a huge argument that internet has become a basic need that everyone should be able to be a part of, and people that are being left out of it are being left out of a very important part of our society. And I think that the same applies when it comes to this ability to communicate in the ways that people do. I won't name the company, but my partner used to work for a place where a lot of the communications between employees and the managers happened over a group chat. And there was one person who had an Android device, and she was often left out of conversations that she needed to be a part of because of the difference between the blue bubble and green bubble texting. Like, there are all of these reasons why things should not be the way that they are. And I want to believe that Apple is not choosing to just completely disregard. Yeah, we don't need you to do iMessage on Android. I understand why that's not a thing, because then again, you're also, by that point, you're asking people on Android to download an app that is not just that bothers me more than anything else, because there are also the people who say, well, why don't we all just move to Telegram, or why don't we all just move to Signal, or why don't we all? The more friction you add to communication, each time you do that, like half of the people who are going to participate drop off, and suddenly
people are abandoned. Yeah,
exactly. They're not interested in adding friction. That's why we stick with iMessage instead of me talking to you. I usually talk to you over Slack because I don't have to worry about the green bubble or worry about the I know I could talk to you in text message, but it's just easier for me to talk to you in Slack. So yeah, I do. As an iPhone user and a longtime iPhone user, and as a person who talks almost exclusively to people who are also iPhone users, I still want this to change. And I have to admit that, there were times when I was back when I was on the dating scene, and on occasion when I would exchange a number with a person, and I texted that person, and then there was a green bubble, and I thought, that's interesting. Because it was more just the idea of like, okay, so how is this going to limit things whenever it comes to communication? And also, we won't be able to share photo albums in the same way. And, all those things that start to come up in your mind of the nice features that you get whenever you're both on the same experience. So I'm not going to lie, like that has come up for me too. And if we limited that by Apple adding RCS support, I think that'd be great.
Yeah. Ron Amadio at Ars Technica shared an article that, has just like, it's gone. It's basically caught fire. Like, there's so many comments on this article. It really resonated. But, and I agree with some of his points. Overall, his point is that, it's all sour grapes for Google. It's Google failed so hard at messaging that now it's coming back and saying, please support us. And I don't really feel like that's necessarily the case too. I'm not arguing that Google hasn't failed at messaging multiple times. I believe that they have, but I think they also have a really good point. Look, here's a growing standard. Just support the standard. The longer you're not supporting the standard, the more it seems like you're intentionally avoiding the standard to make things more complicated and more difficult. And that I don't agree with. So at the very least, then, if you're not going to support the standard, then explain why. I think that we've seen a number of times where we've had executives send out emails, and then those emails get picked up by the press where they explain a thing. I would like that. It would have been good.
Someone in the chat asked, I thought that you switched to Android. They thought that they had heard me say that on the Tech Guy. No, I didn't switch to Android. I used both devices. I have an Android device with a Mint Mobile SIM in it and an iPhone. So I think what Leo and I were talking about on the show was how we both use both platforms pretty regularly. Right. So that also does play a role in me, wanting to be able to use both platforms, because I do, if there's something on the Android device, the Pixel 6, that I come across and I want to save it for later, I will just text it to myself on my iPhone. And, it depends on how it shows up. It might show up as an MMS, an SMS. It could be a whole mess. So, that's troublesome.
A messaging mess.